The Arlington air was heavy that afternoon, as though the earth itself held its breath. Rows upon rows of white marble headstones stretched endlessly, silent witnesses to centuries of sacrifice. The tomb of the unknown soldier stood at the center, a shrine of immaculate discipline and reverence. The guard on duty, a young man in his late 20s, walked with precision, his M14 rifle glinting under the pale sun. His uniform was immaculate, boots polished to a mirror shine, steps measured to the exact inch. For hours, nothing disturbed the sacred silence except the rhythmic click of his heels. Visitors stood at a respectful distance, hushed, watching this ritual that never ceased. Not in rain, not in snow, not even in war. Then, in a moment so sudden it seemed to shatter the air itself, chaos erupted. Screams pierced the quiet. A man at the edge of the crowd had drawn a gun, a black pistol glinting menacingly. His voice was drowned by the gasps of those around him. The tomb guard froze for a fraction of a second, not out of fear, but calculation. His orders were clear. Nothing must disturb the sanctity of the tomb. And yet this was no ordinary disturbance. This was a threat to life itself. In one fluid motion, the guard pivoted on his heel, rifle snapping from ceremonial carry to a ready position. His voice, calm yet thunderous, cut through the panic. "Stop, drop the weapon." The shooter hesitated, startled by the sudden command. The guard advanced, his steps deliberate, measured even now. The air was charged with electricity. Time slowed. Tourists scattered, diving for cover. The assassin's hand trembled. What happened next would be talked about for years. The guard closed the distance with unflinching composure, his rifle leveled, finger near the trigger but not yet pulling. The suspect blinked, suddenly unsure. Reinforcements from the nearby security detail were already racing toward the scene. By the time they arrived, the would-be shooter was disarmed, pinned to the ground by the same man who had moments earlier been pacing in silent tribute. The silence returned, heavier than before, as if the very air acknowledged what had just been averted. Somewhere, a child began to cry softly. An elderly veteran standing nearby removed his cap and saluted the guard. No one spoke, but every heart in that courtyard knew they had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just courage, but a promise kept. The tomb will never be left unguarded. The next morning, the entire nation seemed to be talking about what had happened at Arlington. News channels replayed the grainy phone footage again and again. The guards' measured steps, the pivot, the command, the takedown. Each frame was analyzed by talking heads and retired officers, praising the soldiers' unwavering discipline under pressure. In the barracks, the young guard sat quietly on his cot, staring at the scuffed tips of his boots. His rifle lay disassembled on the table, freshly cleaned. His uniform from the previous day hung on the locker door, still smelling faintly of gunpowder and sweat. There was no celebration in his expression, only reflection. He knew the world saw him as a hero, but to him, it was simply doing what he was trained to do. What generations before him had done. A knock at the door broke his thoughts. His commanding officer entered, cap tucked under his arm. "You did well," the officer said simply, his voice calm but carrying the weight of official recognition. "Yes, sir," the guard replied, posture straightening instinctively. Orders came swiftly. He would continue his duty as scheduled. The tomb would not go unguarded, not for press conferences, not for ceremonies, not for anything. And so, just 24 hours after the attempted attack, he was back on the plaza, his steps as precise as ever. Visitors were different today. The crowd was larger, thicker, filled with people holding flags, some with tears in their eyes. Many stood silently with phones down, simply watching him walk, as if honoring not just the unknown soldier, but the man who had protected the sanctity of that ground. Among them was a small girl clutching a handmade sign. "Thank you for keeping us safe." He noticed it out of the corner of his eye but did not break stride. The guard's face remained composed, but something shifted deep inside him. At sunset, when the relief guard finally came to take over, the young man stepped off the plaza, boots clicking softly. He felt the weight of the day settle on his shoulders, not as a burden, but as a vow. He was no longer just a guard. He was the living embodiment of the promise that nothing, not even fear, could breach the tomb's eternal watch. By the third day, the story had traveled far beyond Arlington. Every major network aired special segments dissecting the incident. accompanied by slow-motion footage of the guards' decisive actions. Commentators spoke about discipline, courage, and the symbolic weight of the tomb itself. Social media erupted with hashtags, and clips racked up millions of views overnight. The guard, however, remained silent. He had no desire for interviews, no interest in internet fame. Each morning he rose before dawn, shined his boots until they reflected the ceiling, pressed his uniform with perfect creases, and returned to his post. But the world would not let go. The Secretary of the Army himself visited Arlington to shake his hand. It was a private moment, no cameras, no reporters, just a simple handshake and a nod of gratitude. The guard returned the salute crisply, his face unreadable, but deep inside he felt the weight of history pressing against his chest. Soon after, an official ceremony was announced. It would not be held in a press room or conference hall, but right there at the tomb of the unknown soldier, a place where words carried weight and silence carried even more. On the day of the ceremony, the plaza was filled to capacity. Rows of folding chairs faced the tomb. Veterans sat in their dress uniforms, their medals catching the morning sun. Families of fallen soldiers gathered quietly, some holding framed photos of loved ones. The guard stood at attention as the ceremony began, his uniform immaculate, rifle gleaming. The master of ceremonies spoke of duty, of the unbroken chain of vigilance that had protected the tomb for decades. Then came the moment everyone had gathered for, the awarding of the Commendation Medal. As the medal was pinned to his chest, a ripple of applause broke through the solemn air. For a brief moment, he allowed himself to exhale, his eyes flicking toward the horizon where endless rows of white headstones glowed in the light. He did not smile, but something in his expression softened, just enough for those who watched closely to notice. After the ceremony, he was approached by an elderly man, the same veteran who had saluted him on the day of the incident. The man extended a weathered hand. "You reminded us what this place means," the veteran said, voice rough but steady. The guard nodded once, words unnecessary. That evening, as twilight descended on Arlington, the plaza was once again quiet. The guard resumed his watch. The world could talk all it wanted. He was where he belonged, keeping his silent promise. The morning air in Washington, D.C. was crisp, carrying the faint hum of traffic as news vans lined the streets outside the studio. Today, the guard would face something entirely different, the glaring lights of live television. For the first time, he would speak directly to millions of viewers who had only seen snippets of his actions, reduced to clips and captions. Inside the studio, cameras rotated silently, capturing every angle. Producers rushed about, adjusting microphones, checking lights, whispering cues into earpieces. The guard sat alone in a quiet corner, uniform immaculate, hands folded across his lap. His gaze drifted toward the floor as he ran through the words in his head, though there were few to say. Discipline and precision were his language. Words he knew were a different battlefield. The host, a woman with a practiced smile and a voice steady as a metronome, approached him. "Thank you for joining us," she said warmly. "Millions have witnessed your courage. Can you tell us what was going through your mind?" The guard inhaled slowly, feeling the weight of every eye upon him. His thoughts flashed back to Arlington. The silence of the plaza, the rows of white headstones, the solemn rhythm of the mat, the heavy yet quiet responsibility. "I did what any guard would do," he said finally, voice low but firm. "It's my duty. My focus is always on the tomb, not myself." There was a pause. The audience leaned in, captivated by the calm authority in his tone. Some viewers at home wiped tears from their eyes. Some veterans straightened in respect. It was a moment that transcended media spin. Authenticity carried its own power. Questions came quickly. About fear, about training, about the moment he unzipped the tote to reveal the badge. Each answer was measured, precise, never a word wasted. The cameras captured the faint twitch of his jaw, the micro-expression of internal tension as he balanced honesty with humility. After the interview, the studio erupted into applause. Crew members quietly shook their heads in admiration. The guard, however, made no show of triumph. He walked back to the side room, removed his jacket, and ran a hand over the polished surface of the badge he carried in his tote. In that moment, it was clear to him. Recognition was fleeting. Duty was permanent. Outside, crowds gathered spontaneously near Arlington, holding signs and flags, hoping to glimpse the man they now called a hero. Some left handwritten notes of gratitude tucked into the barricades. He would never read them. His eyes were on the tomb, not the cheers. As night fell, the plaza was quiet once more. The air carried a different kind of tension, one born of understanding. People had witnessed something extraordinary. But the guard remained as he had always been, a sentinel, bound by a vow older than the applause, a protector unseen in the shadow of history, defined not by fame but by fidelity. Weeks had passed since the flight. The memory of that day lingered, not in headlines but in the quiet hearts of those who had witnessed it. Evan returned to Arlington with a renewed sense of purpose. Each step across the polished stones of the plaza felt heavier and lighter at once, heavier with responsibility, lighter with the knowledge that duty, when performed faithfully, resonated far beyond what one could see. Inside the old guards' barracks, he gathered a group of young recruits. Their eyes were wide, some nervous, some skeptical, as they looked at the seasoned tomb guard before them. His posture was impeccable, a straight spine, squared shoulders, gaze steady. He didn't speak loudly, but every movement, every micro-expression communicated authority, discipline, and calm. "Remember this," he began, voice low, deliberate, carrying over the quiet hum of the room. "The badge is earned, not worn. Every step, every hour, every silent moment counts. People may not see it, may not understand, but it matters." The recruits watched intently as Evan demonstrated the precise steps of the guard's march. He moved slowly, deliberately, each footfall controlled, the rhythm of the mat echoing through the room. They tried to mimic him, but hesitation lingered in their motions. He stopped them, adjusted a hand here, corrected a posture there, never raising his voice. Discipline, he taught, was born of patience, not anger. Later, outside, veterans who had once stood beside him returned to witness the training. Their eyes glistened with memories of decades past. Midnight watches, relentless rain, the solemn duty of keeping the tomb sacred. Some quietly offered nods of approval, others whispered encouragement to the recruits, connecting past and present. Across town, news of Evan's composed handling of the F-35 flight had spread quietly among military circles. Mentors reached out, sharing anecdotes of silent courage, the unseen impact of small acts performed consistently. Though he never sought recognition, the ripples of his actions touched far more lives than he could imagine. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, Evan walked the plaza once more. The stones glimmered faintly in the soft light, the white markers stark against the deepening purple of the sky. A young recruit fell into step beside him, hesitant but eager to learn. Evan glanced at him, a small, almost imperceptible nod acknowledging both effort and potential. No words were needed. The silence spoke volumes. Night descended, but the plaza remained alive with quiet reverence. Flags fluttered in the cool breeze, and somewhere in the distance a bugle played taps. Evan's silhouette stretched long against the white monuments. He paused briefly, placing a gloved hand over the badge he carried, feeling its weight, its history, its promise. Duty, legacy, honor, these were not abstract concepts. They were living, breathing, and carried forward in each step. Each watch, each quiet act of vigilance. The days after the flight blurred into a whirlwind. Photographers snapped pictures outside the barracks, reporters jostled for interviews, and social media buzzed with speculation. Some hailed Evan as a hero. Others questioned the necessity of military protocol in civilian airspace. Yet amidst the chaos, Evan moved with the same quiet precision he had always carried, each step deliberate, each decision guided by the ethos of the tomb guard. Inside the barracks, the senior officers convened to debrief him. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and formal uniforms. Maps of flight patterns and military formations were pinned on the walls, highlighted with neon markers. Evan listened, responding only when clarity was required. He spoke succinctly, with no room for theatrics, his tone measured. Every word reflected a lifetime of discipline, a refusal to let external noise dictate his actions. Meanwhile, journalists had caught wind of the story. Outside the gates, cameras and microphones crowded for a glimpse of the man who had silently commanded F-35 escorts. Fans and critics alike tried to coax statements from him. Evan's face remained neutral, posture rigid yet composed, his eyes scanning the crowd with the trained vigilance of a sentinel. Flashbulbs popped relentlessly, but he remained unfazed, a human embodiment of calm amidst chaos. A young reporter, notebook in hand, pressed closer. "Sergeant Blackwood, some say this could have been dangerous. Why not disclose your identity sooner?" Evan's gaze met hers briefly, eyes steady, Then he gestured toward the old guard insignia on his tote. "Duty is not for recognition. It is for those who cannot speak for themselves." His voice, though low, cut through the surrounding hubbub. The crowd hushed for an instant, absorbing the weight of his words. Inside the barracks training room, recruits were observing from behind a glass partition. Their eyes reflected awe as Evan reviewed video footage of the flight, pointing out subtle maneuvers, the exact formation of the F-35s, and the discipline of the pilots. Every detail mattered. He demonstrated how precision and preparation can diffuse tension, reduce panic, and maintain authority without aggression. The young soldiers leaned in, absorbing lessons that textbooks could never fully convey. Later that afternoon, Evan stood on a raised platform in the public courtyard of Arlington. Citizens, veterans, and curious onlookers gathered, murmuring quietly. A few held flags. Others carried framed photographs of loved ones who had served. Evan addressed them, his voice steady but solemn. What you witnessed was not an act of bravado. It was a commitment to vigilance, honor, and respect. These principles extend beyond the tomb, into the skies, into every place where the unknown must be protected. As he spoke, a light drizzle began to fall. Drops spattered across his uniform, glinting in the subdued sunlight. Yet he did not move to shield himself. Each step, each gesture remained precise. The audience absorbed the symbolism of endurance, discipline, and quiet courage. Cameras clicked, but the images could never fully capture the magnitude of restraint and moral authority that he embodied. By evening, social media posts ranged from awe to skepticism. Analysts dissected his every move. Historians debated the rarity of his experience. Yet Evan returned to his quarters, removed the badge from its tote, and placed it carefully on the polished surface of his desk. Alone, he allowed himself a brief moment of reflection, a reminder that recognition was transient, but legacy endured. Morning sunlight filtered through the tall windows of the Arlington Ceremony Hall, casting a soft glow on polished wooden floors and gleaming brass fixtures. Evan stood quietly near the center aisle, uniform crisp, tote at his side, posture rigid but composed. Veterans in formal dress lined the benches, their eyes fixed on him with a mixture of pride and respect. Families clutched photographs and mementos, honoring the unseen sacrifices made by those who had served. A senior officer approached, carrying a small velvet-lined case. The room hushed as the insignia of official recognition was presented to Evan. He accepted it with precision, hands steady, eyes forward, a silent acknowledgement of the weight of history behind the badge. Murmurs of admiration rippled through the audience, but Evan's expression remained stoic, reflecting the solemn duty that had defined his life. Outside, the courtyard overflowed with people eager to witness the moment. Children on tiptoe, veterans in uniform, civilians holding flags, all converged in quiet anticipation. Evan's movements were deliberate as he walked the perimeter, shaking hands briefly, nodding respectfully, his presence both grounding and commanding. No words were wasted. Each gesture communicated honor and humility. Later, in a more intimate setting, Evan met with families of fallen soldiers. Margaret, the widow from the flight, approached, her eyes glistening with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "For him, for all of them." Evan inclined his head, voice calm and measured. "It is not for recognition, ma'am. It is for remembrance." The room seemed to exhale collectively, the weight of grief and reverence mingling with quiet pride. Reconciliation extended further when Evan visited Arlington's training grounds. Young recruits followed his every step, shadowing him as he demonstrated procedures and etiquette. He moved among them with the same discipline he had displayed in every flight, every guard shift, emphasizing vigilance, respect, and silent accountability. His presence was instructive without being domineering. Each lesson imparted carried the gravity of lived experience rather than textbook knowledge. Photographers captured moments of subtlety, Evan observing a bugle performance, saluting with deliberate precision, adjusting ceremonial rifles for ceremonial drills, the textures of polished brass, damp stone steps from morning dew, and the reflective surfaces of metals created a vivid tableau. The combination of natural light and shadows highlighted the gravitas of the scene without dramatization, underscoring authenticity over spectacle. As the day progressed, Evan took a quiet walk along the memorial pathways. The wind rustled the leaves, mingling with the distant hum of traffic and the occasional salute of passing soldiers. He paused at the tomb of the unknown soldier, placing his hand lightly on the marble, a silent conversation spanning decades of service. The community around him observed respectfully, understanding that his actions, though understated, embodied continuity and honor. Evening descended, casting a golden hue across the monuments. Evan returned to the barracks, badge securely stowed in his tote, reflecting on the day's events. Recognition had been given, yes, but it was the reconciliation, the acknowledgement of collective memory, the bridging of generations, that truly resonated. He allowed himself a brief smile, one that spoke of quiet fulfillment rather than triumph. The late afternoon sun bathed Arlington National Cemetery in warm, amber hues, casting long, soft shadows across the marble pathways. Evan walked slowly among the tombs, his posture disciplined yet unhurried, tote hanging lightly from his shoulder. The air was still, broken only by the distant hum of traffic and the soft murmur of visitors paying their respects. Each step he took carried both weight and reverence, a silent acknowledgement of those who had given everything. Children wandered with their parents, occasionally pausing to look at Evan, sensing the quiet authority he emanated. Veterans walking with canes or in crisp dress uniforms offered nods of recognition, some whispering "thank you" under their breaths. Evan returned each gesture with measured calm, his face betraying no pride, only solemn duty. He paused at a new grave, small and freshly marked, the name etched cleanly into the stone. A family knelt beside it, leaving flowers. Evan stood respectfully at a short distance, hands clasped behind his back, watching their quiet mourning. He remembered the first time he had walked these paths as a young recruit, how the weight of history had pressed upon him. Now, decades later, he felt the same weight, though tempered by understanding and acceptance. Later, Evan returned to the ceremonial plaza. A group of recruits had gathered, now trained enough to understand the deeper meaning behind each motion, each salute, each silent watch. He demonstrated small gestures of precision, how to carry the rifle, how to align with the mat, how to observe the environment without intrusion. His movements were slow, deliberate, the embodiment of respect and professionalism. The light from the setting sun glinted on polished surfaces, the texture of uniforms and rifles enhanced by the golden glow. In the quiet moments, Evan reflected on the flights, the escorts, the ceremonies, and the lives he had touched. Each encounter was a thread in a tapestry of honor and memory. The badge he carried in his tote symbolized more than personal achievement. It was a testament to unwavering dedication, a living bridge between generations of soldiers and the civilians whose freedoms they protected. As evening fell, Evan stood at the edge of a reflective pond within the cemetery grounds. The water mirrored the fiery streaks of sunset, and the tombstones surrounding him glimmered softly in the fading light. He placed his hand gently on the tote, feeling the contours of the badge within. The legacy he bore was not a story to boast of, but a responsibility to uphold. In the quiet solitude, he whispered a simple affirmation of duty, silent, steadfast, eternal. The crowd had thinned, leaving only a few families and visitors. A soft breeze carried petals from nearby flowers, brushing against Evan's uniform. He took a slow, measured breath, feeling the connection between past, present, and future. Each life he honored, each badge earned, each step taken in solemnity, these were the threads of continuity, the unseen guardianship that preserved freedom not through spectacle, but through commitment and remembrance. As night descended, the lights along the pathways glowed softly, illuminating the polished surfaces of stone and metal. Evan finally slung the tote over his shoulder, its weight familiar yet profound. He walked back through the cemetery, leaving footprints that would fade but an example that would endure. Every passerby who glimpsed him carried away a sense of reverence, a quiet reminder that some acts of duty are seen not in applause, but in the solemn acknowledgement of history and sacrifice.